What if someone told you you'd be gone in 7 days, and then everything around you started making it true? This isn't a movie. This is the real story of Christopher Case, a man who predicted his own end down to the final hour. Shadow figures, ancient curses, blood in the bed. Stay until the end because the final moment changes everything. Christopher Case was not the kind of man who left things to chance. In fact, he built his entire life around structure, discipline, and control. He didn't drink, didn't smoke, and treated his health like a sacred temple. Every morning, without fail, he took his multivitamins, followed by an intense workout at the gym. He had made it in one of the toughest industries in the world, music, and climbed the ranks to become a respected executive in Seattle's pulsating music scene. At 35 years old, Christopher Case had what most people would call a dream life. But in the span of 7 days, everything unraveled, and what was once a grounded, rational man became the central figure in a chilling tale of the supernatural, ending in a death that no one, not even seasoned investigators, could explain. It began innocently enough on a business trip to San Francisco in April of 1999. Christopher Case was in the city with a couple of colleagues, and they decided to grab dinner one evening. One of the colleagues brought along a friend, a woman whose presence was magnetic and unsettling all at once. She was older than Christopher by perhaps 2 decades, elegant in a cold, unblinking way. But what truly drew Christopher in was their shared obsession with music, especially music from ancient civilizations, specifically Egypt. For Christopher, whose apartment in Seattle was filled with rare recordings of ancient instruments, this was more than a coincidence. It felt serendipitous. But what he took as a passionate conversation between two enthusiasts was not what she had in mind. When she invited him back to her place that evening, he declined, gently but firmly. She persisted. He declined again. Her charm evaporated in an instant. Her expression hardened, and with a voice void of humor or hesitation, she told him that she was a witch and had just placed a curse on him. He would be dead in 7 days, she said, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Could have been an awkward joke from a woman scorned. Could have been the oddest dinner date he'd ever had. But Christopher Case would come to believe that this moment sealed his fate. Back in Seattle, he called a close friend named Sammy to share the strange encounter. They laughed about it. It felt too ridiculous to take seriously. But within 48 hours, that laughter turned into a chilling silence. On the night of April 13th, Christopher Case lay in bed, trying to fall asleep, when he heard whispering. It was faint, but unmistakable. The voice, if it was a voice, came from the kitchen, soft and quick, as if someone were mumbling into the darkness. He lived alone. He had no pets. The whispering made no sense. He sat up, frozen, listening again. Silence. Then the whispers started again, this time from the other side of the apartment. As he opened his bedroom door to investigate, a blur of movement caught his eye. A dark, human-shaped shadow darted across the hallway. He flipped every light switch in a panic, searching room to room. No one was there. The door was locked, the windows sealed, and yet the whispers didn't stop. The next morning, he called Sammy again, this time with fear in his voice. He wasn't making jokes. He sounded panicked, unsure of his own mind. He described shadowy figures, moving in the corners of his apartment, always vanishing before he could face them directly. The whispering, he said, followed him from room to room. He was starting to question his sanity. But the fear wasn't rooted in a sense of madness. It was rooted in the conviction that something was actually inside his apartment, something not human. On April 14th, Christopher Case tried to push through. He went about his day, attempting to rationalize the night before. Maybe it was just stress. Maybe his mind was playing tricks on him. But that night, the whispers came back louder. The shadows moved slower, closer. At one point, he could see a silhouette, unmoving, lingering in the corner of the room. When he approached it, it disappeared. He didn't sleep. He couldn't. And when the sun rose again, his eyes were bloodshot and wide. April 15th. The whispering had now become a constant. Shadows no longer danced away quickly. They loomed, observed. But the worst came that night. Lying in bed, exhausted and on edge, Christopher Case felt his body lock in place. His eyes were open, his mind alert, but he couldn't move. Sleep paralysis, maybe, but what happened next pushed the boundaries of what science could explain. The whispering started underneath his bed. Then, slowly, a shadow figure began to emerge beside him, rising from the darkness like black smoke. The figure reached out and placed both hands on Christopher's throat and began to press him. He couldn't scream. He couldn't even turn his head. He could only move his eyes, which bulged with terror as the pressure increased. He began to lose consciousness. Then the figure lifted him bodily from the bed, still paralyzed, and threw him back down. And just as quickly, it vanished. When Christopher Case awoke the next morning, he found blood on his bed. His neck was sore, bruised, and his fingers, each one, had small, clean incisions on the tips, bleeding slowly into his sheets. He hadn't done that. He couldn't have. He called Sammy again, and this time he sounded like a man at the edge of the world. He whispered into the phone, his voice hollow, and described everything. The paralysis, the blood, the cuts, the bruises. Sammy begged him to call the police, but Christopher Case refused. He was certain they wouldn't believe him. In a final attempt to fight whatever had invaded his life, Christopher Case turned to faith, or at least to ritual. He visited a religious bookstore and bought books on demonic possession and spiritual protection. He purchased a dozen crucifixes, placed them throughout his apartment, and poured lines of salt along every wall, every doorway, every window. He built small piles of salt at every corner of his home. He scrawled incantations and prayers on scraps of paper and pinned them to the walls. When he was finished, his once tidy apartment looked like a set from a horror movie, a fortress built against the unseen. But that night, something terrified him so deeply he fled. Without packing, without warning, he ran from his apartment and checked into a nearby hotel. He didn't sleep there either. And the following day, April 17th, he left a voicemail for Sammy. The voice on the other end was not frantic, not panicked. It was eerily calm. He said simply, "They're coming for me tonight. There's nothing I can do." The resignation in his tone was more terrifying than any scream. It was a man who had accepted his death. The following day, Christopher Case did not show up for work. Sammy, already deeply worried, contacted the police again and requested a welfare check. The previous day, officers had visited the apartment and found it locked. This time, the door was unlocked. Inside, the apartment felt heavy with silence. Candles had burned down to the wick. Crucifixes still lined the walls. Salt still marked the baseboards like chalk outlines. The messages warning demons were still taped haphazardly across every room. It was the home of a man at war with something no one else could see. They found Christopher Case in the bathroom, fully clothed, kneeling in an empty bathtub. Candles surrounded him. His back was against the wall, hands folded at his chest as if in prayer. There were no signs of struggle, no wounds, no blood this time, but Christopher Case was dead. The coroner would later declare it a heart harm, natural causes, no foul play, but to his friends, his family, and even some of the officers who investigated the case, there was nothing natural about what happened in those final days. Christopher Case was a man who predicted his own death to the exact day. He believed he had been cursed by a woman claiming to be a witch, and in the 7 days that followed, he described encounters so vivid, so terrifying, and so consistent that even the most skeptical found themselves unnerved. His behavior changed overnight. His voice trembled when he called friends. His notes, his preparations, his paranoia, none of it was random. It was the methodical descent of a man trying desperately to survive something unexplainable. There are those who believe Christopher Case suffered from a sudden onset of paranoid psychosis, a mental break brought on by stress, exhaustion, or even an undiagnosed medical condition. There are others who believe his death was truly supernatural, that the woman he met in San Francisco placed a curse on him that unleashed something beyond this world. After all, she had said it clearly, "You'll be dead within a week." And he was. Christopher Case died alone in his apartment, surrounded by symbols of protection that ultimately failed him. Whatever he was running from, whether it lived in his mind or in the shadows, found him. The case remains officially closed, but the questions it raises have never been answered. Can a person's belief in the supernatural become powerful enough to unalive them? Or did Christopher Case uncover something dark and ancient, something that had waited centuries to be awakened? All that remains now are the details: the crucifixes on the walls, the blood-stained sheets, the quiet voicemail of a man who knew he wouldn't live to see morning, and the shadow figure always lurking, always watching. Some say it was just sleep paralysis. Others say it was real. Whatever it was, it came for Christopher Case, and it won. Do you think Christopher Case really experienced something supernatural, or was his mind playing tricks on him? Could belief alone bring about death, or was something truly haunting him from the shadows? Tell us what you think in the comments. Was it a curse? Was it real? Or just tragic coincidence? And don't forget, subscribe for more real stories that defy explanation.